What's going on, everybody? Kalupus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to take another look at the OnePlus Nord N20 5G and go over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. Now, despite this phone having a successor out at this point, I do think the OnePlus Nord N20 5G has a lot to offer. With this phone, we're getting a 6.43-inch AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 409, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So in pretty much every way, we are getting a great display here. With an AMOLED compared to something like an IPS LCD that you typically find in this price range, the display in general is a bit brighter, the colors look nicer, a bit more rich and vibrant, and the viewing angles are a lot better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, the phone is still going to be easy to see. And then of course, with a 1080p resolution, we are getting a nice crisp image, and at 6.43 inches, despite not being the largest display out there, I feel like for most people, unless you're really looking for a giant display, most likely it will at least be large enough. So in general, if you're looking for a mid-range phone that has a nice display for consuming content, you definitely won't go wrong with this phone. Now for storage, with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and while at this point in 2023, for a phone like this is pretty standard. For most people, 128GB will be plenty of storage, so the average user probably won't have any issues here. For security features, this phone does have Face Unlock and a really nice in-display fingerprint scanner too, so definitely nice and premium. And that is one thing they took away with the successor, because with the OnePlus Nord N30 5G, the fingerprint scanner is actually on the power key, which on one hand, it's definitely not a bad spot, but I feel like compared to an in-display fingerprint scanner, this one is just a lot nicer and more premium, and I personally prefer it like this. But as you can see, it definitely does work really well, real fast and responsive, and I am glad that this phone has Face Unlock too. For the camera setup here, with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, up front, we got a nice looking hole punch design for the selfie camera. Not that it really matters, but having it off to the side like this is definitely not nearly as common at this point in 2023. I don't think I've actually seen any new phones with a design like this. Again, doesn't really make a whole lot of a difference, but it is kind of interesting all the same. Now this camera is 16 megapixels. Then on the back, we get a triple camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general, definitely at least a decent camera setup here, but unfortunately there's no ultra-wide camera, which for a phone that originally went for around $300 factory unlocked, this is a little disappointing. I feel like at this point in 2023, with the exception of this phone's successor, no, unfortunately the N30 5G doesn't have an ultra-wide camera either. I feel like most phones over $300 all have ultra-wide cameras. It is a pretty basic common feature, so seeing that this phone doesn't have it is definitely disappointing, but at least we are getting a macro camera, and with the 64 megapixel main camera, the regular photo quality is pretty good too. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G. And again, overall, I do think the photo quality is pretty good here. For the average user, if you're looking for a phone that's on one hand decently affordable, but on the other hand still can take really good photos when you need it to, you're not going to go wrong with this phone. Now, are there mid-range phones that have better photo quality than this? I would definitely say there are, but at the same time, again, if you're looking for something more affordable and maybe you're not really a super heavy camera user and you really just need the occasional nice looking photo every now and then, for that kind of use, despite a few shortcomings, I do think the camera we're getting here will at least be good enough. Now for the RAM and processor, with the OnePlus Nord N20 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 695 5G processor, so definitely not a bad processor. In fact, I've seen it in quite a few phones now, and all of them have really good performance for what they are, so I definitely have no complaints here. For the average user, for stuff people typically use smartphones for, like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe some light to moderate mobile gaming, for that kind of thing, it will get the job done just fine, but just keep in mind it's still nowhere near flagship level. So if you're coming from, say, a Samsung Galaxy S10 or maybe an older iPhone, something that's a bit higher end but also a bit older, just keep in mind this phone is definitely going to feel like a bit of a downgrade. But if you're coming from a lower end device, it might be the complete opposite. But again, if you're looking for a phone for more basic activities and you still want decently fast performance, I do think it will get the job done. Now I ran a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So what I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone stands performance-wise compared to your current device, because depending on what you have, again, it may or may not actually be an upgrade. If you're coming from something like an older flagship phone, it's definitely going to be a bit of a downgrade. But if you're coming from a typical mid-range phone or even a lower-end device, then it's probably going to be a different story. But in general, again, if you're looking for for something for more basic activities that has average mid-range performance, and your needs are really not that complex, then for most people, I do think you will be okay here. Now for the battery, the OnePlus Nord N25G has a 4500 mAh battery, and honestly, for a mid-range phone, by 2023 standards, this is really not great. I mean, sure, a 4500 mAh battery is not small, but at the same time, considering pretty much every other phone in this price range is going to have a 5000 mAh battery, if battery life is really a priority for you, then you can do better. That being said though, keep in mind, the OnePlus Nord N25G, despite not having wireless charging, does support 33 watt fast charging, and for what it is, this is really impressive. Now, on one hand, the successor is even better, but at the same time, if you are looking for something that charges up really fast, and you don't mind having slightly worse battery life, then in that case, compared to the average mid-range phone, the N25G will be pretty good. Now for the software, the OnePlus Nord N25G does have Android 12, which is on one hand kinda disappointing compared to basically every new phone in 2023, since basically all of them have Android 13, but since this phone started with Android 11, it at least got one major update eventually. So if you're not really that concerned about software, and you really just need something that works, then you will at least be okay here. When it comes to other features, this phone does have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you won't have to worry about that here. Now taking a look at the overall design, this is one thing I really like about this phone, because despite being made of pretty much all plastic, it does have a nice finish, the build quality is good so it doesn't feel cheap at all, and in general, it does feel nice and sleek and modern. I like the camera module a lot, and it has this kind of frosted finish, and while you can kind of see fingerprints in certain lighting, it's definitely not nearly as bad as some other phones. In fact, for that matter, compared to the N35G, the N35G has kind of a glossy finish and the fingerprints are a lot worse here, so I feel like at least when it comes to the finish, I actually like the N20 a bit better. But in conclusion, is the OnePlus Nord N25G still worth buying in 2023? Now in general, I will say it's probably not the best choice at this point in 2023, despite this phone being decently affordable. There are so many other options out here, and considering this phone doesn't even have Android 13, I feel like for the money, you can probably do better. That being said though, it's really not a bad phone, so if you happen to find a really good deal on it, and you're looking for a mid-range 5G phone that has a nice sleek design, a great display for consuming content, plenty of storage, a decent camera setup, NFC for tap and pay, and decently good performance too, then in general, despite again probably not being the best choice, I do think the OnePlus Nord N25G is still worth considering. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.